Yes.
Okay, great. Let's get started.
Thank you so much for making this time again for me to finalize this and to just share with everybody. And I believe I was almost complete with this screen. I'll just kind of go back and just summarize. So yeah, Diversion, we get at least about 100 new guests or profiles created every month and more, especially in the winter season. So obviously, a lot of these guests require little or very little support to exit shelter. Um, and then we also have the return to shelter guests. So Diversion also supports individuals that may have been in shelter 6 months or more, and then, for one reason or the other, they did return. So this is what really classifies Diversion. We can move to the next slide. So what does this look like when somebody comes into shelter? Our goal is really to connect with them as soon as possible. When they do come into shelter, they connect with our shelter staff, who then create a profile for them, complete a new clan orientation, and then almost immediately refers these individuals to our program. Outcomes for each individual will vary. Some individuals will self-resolve almost immediately, will never come back the next day just because of what the shelter environment looks like. Or maybe they simply just needed, temporary overnight, shelter for that day. There are some individuals that we will reach out to that may have been referred to us, and we notice they may not have checked in after the first day and will let us know that, hey, no, actually I did end up getting connected with family, or I no longer need shelter supports. And sometimes we do support them in self-resolving. So sometimes it might require them to actually do it themselves, or we would provide little support for them. The second area would be somebody would be exit shelter through CAA, Coordinated Access Assessment under Calgary Homeless Foundation. So they might have already been on that list where a needs service questionnaire was completed and they were picked up for housing through that program. We do also support them get connected with CAA, and they're housed that way. Independent housing is the next one. If we're not able to exit somebody out of shelter almost immediately, we do admit them into our program and look at housing them independently. And we'll review that in the future slides coming up. Relocation and nurture supports can mean the same thing. And these are other two outcomes that we usually try to get individuals out of shelter. Nurture supports in the sense that they can go back to family within Calgary. Relocation will really require a lot of moving outside Calgary. We do have funding that can support that too. So if somebody needs to move to a different state, province within Canada, we have funding to get them to where they need to go, as long as they have ID. So we just might have to see if they can get ID if they don't have one, especially if they're flying. But if they need to use a bus, we have ID specialists on site that usually can support with getting a statutory declaration. And that in itself is enough to get on a bus. So relocation and natural supports also is something that would be an outcome for somebody coming into shelter. Appropriate shelter is another one. Being a low barrier shelter might not be an appropriate environment for a lot of individuals coming to the DI, especially if they are sober. So we look at what's going on with them, and we look at other shelters that might be more appropriate for them. We'll collaborate with those different shelters within Calgary and see if we can transfer them to that shelter. And then if we can collaborate in terms of housing with that specific shelter, we can do that as well, just to make sure that they don't have to stay in shelter if that's not necessary at that point. Supportive housing is another one. This one usually would be for a lot of our senior guests. We have collaborated with a lot of senior housing programs within Calgary, and we do kind of support with those applications for them to transfer to those housing programs. And the last one would be DI housing, which I'll talk about for in the next slides, but we do have 3 buildings that the DI runs, and it's mixed market as well as, we use part of those units for some of our guests in the building to move into those programs as well. So in a nutshell, these are some of the outcomes that we are familiar with a lot of our guests, but like I said, a lot of these outcomes are individualized, and where somebody has a goal that they need to achieve that's not on this list, we still work with them to ensure that they exit shelter if that's the case. Next slide, please. So if we're not able to get somebody out, they didn't self-resolve, they never relocated, and they never went to another shelter or back to family, we'll look at what does housing look like for you and how can we support you to get housed? Diversion really does a lot of assessment because when an individual comes into shelter, we want to know what the health situation looks like. Where are they coming from? Were they previously housed, or have they been rough sleeping, or maybe just temporarily staying with other family members? What does that look like, and how can we get them out of shelter? So we usually have to really assess their complexity level. What does that look like? With diversion, we focus primarily with individuals that can be somewhat independent. So from low to mid complexities is what diversion will cover. For somebody that has multiple barriers or has high complexities, we refer them to our housing support program. Our housing support program will also try and get that needs questionnaire assessment completed, which is under CAA. That way, they have appropriate housing supports for them, whether it's supporting housing, surrounding their mental health or physical health, and other, barriers that they might have going on. So once that assessment is made, we will cater for those low to medium complexity and then look at housing. We want to really look and see that this individual can potentially have successful housing independently. And we want to see what kind of supports we can provide for them in order for them to exit shelter. So the first thing we do is assess. And the next thing we do is housing searches. After that, next slide, please. So what we do is, yes, what does housing look like for you? We really want to make sure that we are prioritizing their housing preferences. So we ask them questions like, what sort of accommodation are you looking for? Are you looking to room? Are you looking for your own space? Does it look like you want, your income will allow you to afford rent all by yourself, or do you need that shared accommodation? Second thing, which is very important, is they need to have income before they're housed. Obviously, we want to make sure that they have income and they can afford the kind of unit that they're looking for. If they don't have income, we can support them in applying for Alberta Works. And this is temporary income for anybody in Calgary or in Alberta that's not working, and they qualify for this Alberta Works. With Alberta Works, unfortunately, you can only afford a rooming kind of situation because, of course, the income is pretty low. Knowing how much somebody earns will actually allow them to know what their budget is and how much they're willing to put towards rent. We also ask them what kind of area they would like to live in, because obviously one of the things we'd like to encourage them is to build their natural supports. So we'd like them to live in an area they're familiar with. And even if they're not familiar with that area, we would like to see how we can help them familiarize themselves by engaging in the community to build that natural support system for themselves. The other thing too is, what else do you need in the home? Do you have pets? Because then we'd like to find a pet-friendly unit for you. The other thing too is a lot of our guests would like to have utilities included in their rent. So part of that housing search would require us to look at some of those units that include utilities. And some guests would have mobility challenges, so they would request to have like a train station or a bus stop around, the house that they're looking for. So some of those things are some of the things that we look at and ask our guests to see what that housing search looks like. And then we'll go on to look at, search for those units, as well as work with some of the landlords that we have already on our list with the locations that they're requesting for, and see if we can set up a viewing for them, which is our next slide. So after we do our housing searches, we know what the guest is asking for. We actually reach out to the landlords with those available units and pretty much set a viewing appointment for them. Next slide, please, Grant. A lot of our guests, again, are pretty independent, and some of them, even though they're independent, they really want additional support to be able to connect with the landlord. There's a lot of stigma that comes with staying in a shelter. And with a big shelter like our shelter, there are so many barriers to our guests getting housed. So a lot of them need that additional support to just connect with the landlord, to kind of mediate and advocate on their behalf, to be able to just, connect with them and potentially get that unit for themselves. So we do a lot of encouragement and validation, because obviously life happens to everybody. And the fact that you're staying in a shelter does not give you less opportunities, or should not give you less opportunities compared to anybody that would be looking at the same unit you're looking at, but not staying in the shelter. Sometimes we also have to role play, pretend I'm a landlord, they're the tenant looking to get that place. What does that look like? What kind of questions would a landlord ask you? And what kind of questions can you ask them? And how would you respond to those questions? A lot of our guests that are on Alberta Works, because of the limited income that they have, usually tend to struggle to find units to rent. So sometimes when landlord asks if they're working, and if they're not, they would rather go with somebody that's working. So how can you sell yourself out to stand out, even if you're not working but have that income? And part of that, what Alberta Works has put in place is they have a system where you can sign up and they can pay the landlord directly before they pay you. So that guarantees the landlord that they'll get their check regardless, even before the amount gets into the guest's account. So that's one of the ways we've tried to encourage the guests to sell themselves and say, hey, I get enough to pay for this rent, and I can guarantee you that this check will come to you even before it hits my account. And that's one of the ways they try to stand out compared to other guests and tenants looking for the same unit that they're looking for. Next slide. So after the viewing, or when they go to the viewing, we have a document that's called the rent report. This document is very important in terms of the funding that we get, but also for individuals not working and require Alberta Works. Alberta Works will require this document showing that, yes, they did find a place. This document indicates how much this individual will be paying for rent as well as damage deposit, because then this helps them prove that they have a place and also require this funding or this income to be able to support their housing situation. So this rent report has to be filled out by the landlord. On the top part of this form has the tenant's name. So that will have our guest's name up there. And at the bottom page, we'll have the landlord's information. The stuff in the middle just indicates what really comes with this unit. Is the utilities included? Is it a bachelor unit? Is it a shared accommodation? So whatever that looks like, the landlord will fill out the information as required. And we use that for funding purposes. And for individuals needing Alberta Works, we support them with that application, and we'll need to attach this document to the application for approval. So we always ensure that when our guests are going for a viewing, they carry this with them. Should the landlord, be interested in them and would like to rent to them, they can then present this to them to get it completed, and we can start the financial process approval for them to be able to move in almost immediately. Next slide, please. So we have funding, like I mentioned in the beginning, we're funded by the government of Alberta, as well as Calgary Homeless Foundation. And we have funding that can cover first month's rent and damage deposit. I also did mention in the beginning that obviously we can cover this, but we need to ensure that the guests have income and they can afford the place that they're looking for us to be able to cover this. So in that regard, we'll need proof of income. So if somebody's already working, we'll require bank statements from them. Usually we just require 60 days bank statements, and this is a guide that Alberta Works also needs. So if we have this information and they in turn need to apply for Alberta Works, we already have that information to support them further. We can also take pay stubs if that's the case and they don't have a bank account. And there are times that somebody might indicate that, hey, I don't have any pay stubs or bank statements, but I just started work. So in that case, we would request for an employment letter. And this letter would indicate how much they have, they'll be earning or what their income looks like. Again, if they don't have income, we're available to support them to get Alberta Works first, and then we process this for them. In order to get funding again, we need that rent report. Sometimes landlords would prefer to get a lease signed if it's like a longer term agreement with our guests. So we'll get that instead as well. So either document will work for us to get funding. Next slide. After they apply for financial assistance and we now have a move-in date, what do we do to prepare them to move in? We try to set them up with a food hamper. So we'll make a referral to the Calgary Food Bank to ensure that we can deliver at least some food items for them to start off with when they do move out. Our shelter also has a donation center where our free goods program is run. We get a lot of donations there, from clothes to furniture to foodstuffs as well. So we do set up our guests to have an appointment there. They go there, they shop around and pick out what they need for their new home. We then also are able to provide them with transportation. We do have a movers list. So we have quite a few movers that are contracted to the DI, and we kind of arrange transportation for those items that they've picked up from our donation center. For the ladies, we also go to WINS as well for any additional items that we might not have at our donation center, and they might go there as well to kind of see what else they need for their household. Our donation center also runs a CLICK program, and this is usually just computers for low-income Calgarians donated by individuals in the community. So we have, sometimes we get laptops, sometimes we get actual computers. So sometimes there's a wait list, but we can refer them to that program, and when a computer is ready, they would reach out to this assigned worker to be able to deliver that to the guest once they move out. So these are some of the things that they would pretty much qualify for, or they would get access to when they're moving out. Additional to this, we call 211, which has various resources in Calgary that our guests might need that's outside this list. And then right after that, we provide additional resources. Next slide, please. We do provide additional resources for our guests to support them in maintaining or sustaining themselves in the community. In addition to building natural supports, we do realize that a lot of times once we kind of exit our guests into shelter and they're housed, the only thing they know is the DI. The only thing they know is the person that they worked with when they were in shelter. So when they happen to have struggles starting to happen, whether it's they feel they can't pay next month's rent, or they feel they need additional food, they tend to come back to us. And our goal is to try to empower them to become more independent and to access additional resources that might be available in the community. So we do give them additional resources regarding food, where they can go to get additional food if they do need food other than the food bank. We also provide them with other financial assistance programs for additional financial support that they might need in the future, as well as calling 211, because this provides them with specific resources that they might need in Calgary. So these are some of the things we provide them with to allow them to become a little bit more independent in the community. This takes time. Sometimes they do come back. We try to work with them again to rehouse them, and sometimes it takes a few times for them to become sustainable. We don't turn them away when they do come back, but we hope that we build on that independence each time they come back. However, each time they do come back, we provide them with all the resources that they'll need. For those individuals that we house that seem to have multiple barriers and will need additional support, our housing support program that I talked about earlier do have community case managers that could reach out to these individuals in the community to try and support them with additional supports that they might need while they're housed. And this usually does limit a lot of those dependencies into coming back to the DI directly. So these are the ways that we usually try to kind of just come in and try to get our guests almost immediately exit shelter once they come to the DI. Obviously, we do get their consent. However, this program is available for each individual that's accessing the DI. And if they're willing to get these supports, we meet them almost immediately when they come to shelter. And we carry out these steps to ensure that they're housed. They have additional goals to housing, and our goal is to find out what goals that they have, because we want to make sure that they have that ground and foundation in the community. We don't want them to entirely depend on Alberta Works in the long run. We use that for them to get out of shelter. But job-wise, what does that look like? What kind of supports can we connect you with in the community? And that's why collaborating with a lot of external partners in the DI is very paramount for our program, because this is the only way that our guests, when they move out into the community, are able to sustain themselves as well. So we do follow up with them a month after they've moved out to see how things are going. How do you need anything else? How can we continue supporting you? If they need any kind of support moving forward, again, we do make that referral to our community case managers to kind of check in and see how things are going. Just because of how short our time frame is and how many individuals we get on a monthly basis, we can only manage to follow up to a month. And then for those that need additional support, we'll get like a community case manager to kind of follow up on a continuous basis. But generally, this is really most of the stuff that we do for the individuals that come into the shelter. Next slide, please. So far, and this is as of last month, starting March, our fiscal year starts usually in March. These are some of the outcomes that we've seen so far in our diversion program right now. We have housed about 98 individuals. 10 have been housed through CAA. 4 were housed through DI housing. The 3 buildings that I talked about, Sundown, Bridgeland, and Greenview Rise are the names that we have. And then independent housing, we had about 83 individuals that we housed through that program. Supportive housing, we had 1 individual. And then we had 7 individuals that we had referred to the Mustard Seed and Salvation Army. And these are more on the sober end of the spectrum when it comes to shelters. We had 2 exit to natural supports, and this was within Calgary, so they went back to their families. 17 relocated, and this is a combination of relocation for work reasons, but also relocation to connect with family. And about 7 resolved. We do have more people that resolve, but 7 is the only number that we're able to keep track of, because these 7 people resolved and never came back. A lot of times people would self-resolve, but then it might only take a few weeks or a few days before they come back, and would have to kind of figure out what kind of sustainable outcome would be appropriate for them. So yeah, that's just like an idea of what our outcomes have been so far this year. And that's pretty much all I had. Unless there are any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Amelia. Oops, I just closed something that I shouldn't have. But I have lots of questions, but before I might pose some questions to you and Kristen and Lindsay, if they're still here with us, is look to the audience to see if there's any questions that anybody has for Amelia, Kristen, and Lindsay in regards to rehousing folks out of your shelter. Okay. Well, maybe if I ask some questions, it will kind of get the ball rolling for some folks. Might prompt them to think of some questions that
I did notice that there's one question in the Q&A and one in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for catching that. Sorry. Peter asks, is anyone using tiny houses and also building through a social enterprise? Open to either any one of you if you want, if you have an answer for that.
On our end, we do have, yes, we do. We have actually collaborated with quite a few landlords, not entrepreneur in this case, but there's some landlords that have homes that they run and have decided to partner with the DI. So when they do have openings or they have units available, they do reach out to us, and we do reach out to them when we have guests that are looking for homes. So in Calgary, yes, we've partnered with quite a few landlords in this case to kind of just support our guests as they're coming into shelter and supporting them in quickly exiting shelter. Because with the way things are with the housing market, it's really hard to engage with just random landlords out there in the community. And once they know that these individuals are coming from the shelter, it creates multiple barriers as well. So we're very much open and are looking to connect even with more people that are willing to partner with the DI. Knowing that we provide first month's rent and damage deposit has made it easier, because then it gives, guarantee that yes, these individuals will definitely be paying once they're moving into those units. I don't know if that answers or helps clarify that question.
Well, I think also too, Peter, you can feel free to speak if you'd like. I just want to clarify, is your question about asking like if either organization partners with anybody who develops tiny homes?
Yeah, there are several in the Toronto area that are in Ontario that have tiny homes.
Mm-hmm.
And they really make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So Winnipeg does, thank you for the question, Peter. Winnipeg does have its first like kind of tiny home village officially that I believe opened 2 years ago. Yeah, a little while. Anyways, yeah, it's not too far from some of like the hub where the main shelters are. So we definitely send in referrals there. I think it's a group of 12 tiny homes, and then they have like a center fire, and it's really nice there. And then there was another question you had, social enterprise, maybe, just check. Building through social enterprise. So we have so Siloam has a new housing strategy. We're trying to build or get 700 units online. That's our big audacious goal. It's also not enough for what we need, but that's our hope as Siloam. And so I know that we are partnering with, there's a social enterprise that has helped with construction on some reunification housing that we're attending a grand opening for next week, that we're tenanting. And then we've partnered with a reunification agency that specializes in that will provide that support. But that was partnering with a social enterprise. And we ourselves at Siloam, we have social enterprises, and then we use them for housing related tasks. We're looking to onboard some more services from them. But yeah, it's kind of new for us. Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody apply a homeless entrepreneur program teaching homeless people how to start a business? I did that in the Toronto area.
Cool.
Yeah, that's not something that we do here at Siloam, but there is another agency in Winnipeg that does do startup grants for people who are wanting to start up a business. And so anyone who would be looking at that, we would refer them to that other agency.
Is that homeless people?
It's homelessness or people who are low income. Yeah. They have to be under a certain threshold of income to qualify for that program.
I know too, just there are some examples of social enterprises where it's pairing staff with people with lived experience who are starting to focus their social enterprise around home renovations or moving services or furniture depots and things like that. So it's folks who have lived the experience of being homeless while also actively their labor is working towards helping people create their new home when they are rehoused. So super cool. One example that I can think of right off the bat is just in kind of my neck of the woods is Youth Opportunities Unlimited in London, Ontario, that has a social enterprise that used to do recycling and I think preserves in a kitchen, and they kind of pivoted now to doing more like moving furniture bank and home renovations with youth who experience homelessness as kind of entering into the workforce and developing new trade skills.
Yep, so we have that in Winnipeg. We have Purpose Construction here is just like one of the examples that I can think of off the top, and Build, yeah. And so they are the ones partnering with this reunification housing as well. So they renovated the building, so that would be folks with lived experience as well. So very cool. Nothing for us without us. Yeah.
I can also see here from Michelle, she's stating that Redwood Community Parks is a great example in Simcoe County. Very cool. Are there other questions from the audience? One thing that I was thinking about, and this isn't one of the preset questions that I sent all of you in preparation for this, but as everyone was presenting either in part one or in part two, the focus of this webinar was about self-directed and then staff supported or staff involved resolutions, rehousing resolutions. But I think what I heard from all the presenters is that if it does require staff support, which sounds like a lot of folks do require that, it's a pretty active and involved process. So you can see why it requires designated case management positions to kind of do that rehousing work to work directly with folks in shelter. But what are some types of more passive engagement that are still rehousing focused that maybe your shelter workers that work exclusively in the shelters and don't do case management could maybe tasks or types of engagement they can do with shelter guests that still maintains that rehousing focus?
I can go first. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Amelia, go.
One of the things we look at is we have a lot of guests that would come into shelter and have never had any piece of identification whatsoever. So we do what we call seed planting, housing seed planting conversations. We might not talk about, hey, do you want to get housed off the bat, but we'll talk about, hey, do you have ID? When was the last time you did taxes? Small things like that, kind of stir up that conversation, which might eventually, get them to start thinking about housing. A lot of guests would say, hey, I've actually never had an ID in years. And just having that piece of identification that has your name, your face, your date of birth just means a lot to a lot of individuals. One of the other things we do is replace birth certificates, especially if somebody was born in Alberta. We do still kind of send requests for somebody born outside Alberta, but our ID specialists would support in replacing those documents. And we've seen a lot of change in just somebody knowing and seeing that, hey, this is me and this is my document, because they've just never had that in years. And before you know it, they might come back and ask more information. So it's pretty much just talking about housing. When was the last time you were housed? Maybe even identifying why maybe they're not interested in housing at that point. But like I said, also taxes is another thing. A lot of individuals haven't filed taxes in 10 years plus. We've seen that a lot with a lot of guests coming into our shelter. So these are the basic things that we do. We do have health services on site as well. So somebody might come in with some health concerns and they haven't taken medication in a long time. We, connect them with a doctor. We actually go to the appointment with them just to learn more about their health. And if they do think about housing, how can we support them in that housing with their health, right? So we get them a doctor's appointment who reviews what's going on and possibly get them back on medication, right? So we get them connected to our health services. And sometimes they might say, hey, I just want to detox. We do have a detox program on site as well. So we can make that referral, right? So it's those basic things that eventually we hope that at some point we can get to that housing aspect. So that's how we get started with some of those housing conversations with our guests coming to the DI.
Anything you want to add, Kristen or Lindsay?
That's great. I so wish that we had a detox on site. That would just really up our game. Some of the things that we do, we did mention in the presentation, in our shelter, the shelter staff will leave like a packet of information on a shelter guest's bed. They will have a conversation with them every so often, ask them, if they're looking for things or if they need a bit of assistance. Something else that happens fairly regularly and in our community is they'll have a service expo day. And so they'll have all kinds of service providers from all over the community come into a particular shelter. So sometimes it's ours, sometimes it's one of the others in our area. And there'll be people there from Service Canada, people there from the ID places, from banks, from various different things that are some of those really essential startup type things, our employment income assistance program. And so it's an opportunity for guests to have that first touch point of entry into one of those systems as well. So even if they're not wanting to talk with a staff of one of the staff at the shelter, there's all of these services available, and they might pick up a brochure, or they might, engage with the person there about getting their taxes done, or any of those kinds of things to kind of start that process. And we also on our first desktop of the computers that are open for community access, the first page that pops up is our Siloam homepage that has quick links for housing, for income, for ID. And so it's sort of hey, have you thought about these things? It sort of pops up in front, and they might skip over it, the first number of times that they are on a computer, but then maybe one day they'll decide to click on it and take a look and see what's available.
Also, a little shout out to the DI. We had a team from Siloam travel to, unfortunately it wasn't Lindsay and I, but we had a team from Siloam travel to the DI and work with their folks on kind of how they do diversion, since they're such leaders in the field about that. So shout out to them. And it's very fun to share the hour with you, Amelia, to see how you're doing it. And it's really neat because in the last few weeks, we've been really trying to work that diversion. So I know that the drop-in staff, they pick one staff per shift, and then that person's it used to be that we could just put our folks on the bed list and they'd be a priority one if they were coming from transition services. And now that person actually has to meet with the drop-in staff, and they go through hey, kind of what's going on here? What's what are your other options? But I thought that was really cool to see that kind of rolling out. So yeah, thanks,
amazing. You're welcome.
Oh, and Amelia, I also wanted to say, Lindsay and I wrote down, we were like, that's a good question that you asked too, about how much are you willing to put towards rent? I love that, because I think sometimes we say like, what's your income? And then we kind of decide
Like, how much can you afford?
how much can you afford? But really, like, I think that's a really person-centered way. So we're like making notes.
Yeah.
Ooh, good question here, Peter. Does anyone run a program like Out of the Cold, which is run in our area by Blue Door Shelters and involves several community partners? We did last year. We're going to do it again this year. Do you want to tell a little bit about it?
Sure. Yeah, so in our community, in the winter, we usually have extra funds that are available to be able to have some sort of warming space overnight for people who are sleeping rough. Everyone knows about Winnipeg winters and how it's not a fun place to be outside in winter. Portage in Maine, the coldest place in North America at times. And so last year, our shelter partnered together with several other shelters to be able to provide ongoing access to space overnight where they could stay warm and have their needs met. We did find that actually staffing that was a little bit of a challenge because the positions were each from another shelter, and then they would come and bring their staff over to our location, but they were just using our daytime space as a warming space overnight. And it was just logistically a little bit of a problem. And so this year, all those organizations got together and they said, actually, we think it'd be better to just give all the funding to one organization and for them to run it. And we will just provide the information to our community guests that are looking for space when we're full or needing additional things. So we loved having the partnerships, and certainly it was really great to be able to build better connections with some of those other shelters. But just with the shortage of staff that is consistently happening across the field, I think when there's turnover and that kind of thing, those extra positions ended up getting sucked back up by their shelter of origin. And so it was just a little bit difficult to do.
The other thing was because it was temperature dependent, right? So we would only open it up if it was like, don't quote me, but maybe -10.
It was -10.
Like yeah, okay, perfect. So there was like a set threshold. So then we didn't fully know like until a couple days before if it was going to be open. So managing that staffing. So now this year it's going to be open November to March regardless of the temperature. So they've just been able to make a few changes. But yeah, it'll be in-house. It'll have capacity for 116 individuals. So that'll be separate from our overnight shelter.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason they were able to make those changes was because of those community organizations coming together and saying, okay, these are the parts that didn't work. It doesn't work for community to not know, is this place going to be open tonight or not, depending on what, the Weather Channel said it was going to be. So just having the consistent place, okay, yes, any time from November to March, you could go there.
Mm-hmm. And I know too that like from shelter lead, like this doesn't speak directly to rehousing, but that's okay. But like hearing more and more from shelter leaders of saying winter response plans and extreme weather responses need to just be all season responses, right? The threats to safety and health and well-being, if you're homeless, applies to all the seasons, whether it's extreme cold, extreme heat, flooding, violence, whatever it might be. And the other big thing is exactly that. It makes, if it's very weather dependent, if you're open or not, makes it hard to like staff it, to recruit. Am I working or not? Is the service available or not? It creates a lot of confusion. So glad to hear that it's moving more towards this idea of just being consistently open, even just to say every day during these months, right? So it's great. I always include one question to audience or to presenters that always touches on this topic of motivation, because motivation and keeping people motivated, I think, is such a big, important thing that we're doing when we're thinking about any type of client engagement work, whether it's rehousing or anything else. So how do you maintain shelter guest motivation in addressing their housing crisis and staying motivated to move towards rehousing despite what seems like everything that would suggest that people should give up their motivation, right? Or I guess another way of framing it is to say, how do you keep people motivated even when you're not seeing results as quickly as you'd like, or they're not seeing things change as quickly as they like? So maybe just practical strategies that help with sustaining that motivation.
Sure. I just want to check if Amelia has an answer that she wants to go first.
I can go first.
Sure.
So, yes, we do get Tim Hortons gift cards is number one thing. So when we're trying to get, for example, a guest has an appointment, we get bus tickets donated as well. We want to make sure that they can get to their appointment, but also if it's cold outside, is it cold or hot outside, they can go to Tim Hortons, get a coffee or get a, something cold for the way. So we hope that this maintains that motivation because it takes care of those barriers, those limitations, because somebody cannot come to you and say, hey, I don't have a way to get there. If we can drive them there, we'll give them a bus ticket to get there. We ensure that they have a meal or at least something to drink on their way there. So we look at what barriers are they facing? What is really preventing them from really accessing those services or from not really necessarily being interested in the program to begin with, right? So get them to an appointment. We'll give them a Tim Hortons gift card. Go buy coffee on your way. Here's a bus ticket. Or do you need a ride? We can drop you off there if you need to. You can use the train or the bus on your way back. So we try to make those accommodations as much as we can. Our housing program also has space on our 4th and 5th floor where somebody that's admitted into a program will get an assigned bed for the time frame that they're in their program. So they don't have to worry about, hey, I don't want to get a mat on the floor because I'll end up being in an overflow space when I get back to the shelter because maybe I'm coming from work or I just had to go somewhere and ended up coming back to shelter late, right? So in the winter, especially in the winter when we fill up, we get a lot of overflow space at the DI where we'll end up putting mats on the floor. And a lot of individuals might want to know that they have a bed to get to, regardless of what time they show up at the DI. So somebody that's engaged in housing will get an assigned bed for the time frame they're in the program. So that kind of has helped motivate it in a way because regardless of where they are, they know that, hey, I'll have a meal. I have a specific bed I know I'm going to sleep in and a locker, assigned as well. So that kind of helps in a way support them better, but also keep that journey so much more easier living in a shelter because they have a space to keep their belongings, assigned space for that matter, a bed and a locker that they can utilize while in shelter. And they know that if they need to go somewhere, we'll try our best to support them in getting to where they need to go. So those are a few ways that we try to keep that engagement level going. And we really let them know, hell, what else do you think you need that we're not providing you at this very moment? That if we did provide you would kind of make this much more easier for you and help you accomplish those goals that you have going on. So we try to keep those conversations open so that if there's anything else that they might need, and hopefully we can be able to provide or refer them to a program that will be able to provide those requirements for them, we'll do just that and then collaborate that way.
Love it. I'm here for the practical things that we can do. And I really love the asking, what does that look like for you, right? Because person-centered is so important. Housing is such a, everybody's risk factors and protective factors are so different. So that is awesome. I know with Winnipeg has a bit of a unique situation here in that, so for every 20 people that need a low income unit, there are 3 low income units available in Winnipeg. So one of the things
not even available, but like built and on the market.
Yeah, but not like vacant right now, but like on the market, right? Thank you. And so one thing that we try to really know is just all your classic MI, your classic motivational interviewing concepts that everybody is motivated for something. And so even when, I'm thinking of an example of somebody that we have worked with in the past who was here for years and years and years. And when we asked them hey, let's talk about housing. They were like, no, it's okay. I have something on the horizon. It's okay. This is for now. And then after years and years of it being just for now, just kind of really, as we were just like, okay, well, no worries. Let's just go get a coffee then. And, not having that relationship, the spirit of MI, right? That relationship is so important.
Yeah.
And then we found out that actually they had fallen for a scam, and it actually wasn't going to be something that was going to materialize soon, and it was just for now. They were like stuck here if that plan hadn't materialized, which it wouldn't, because it wasn't real. And so kind of navigating those things, but just recognizing when people are staying here, like, what are they motivated for? So for instance, also people who have like grown up in care, or who have been institutionalized, or who have been in jail or whatever, right? Different things that, maybe the predictability is kind of comforting. Of course, being homeless, experiencing homelessness, I should say, is traumatic.
Yeah.
But this is something that they know and that they're used to. And so they're motivated by, okay, well, at least I know that I have a safe place tonight. It's not my home, but it's somewhere that I don't have to, like, that there's staff watching, and that it doesn't have bed, different things. And so not seeing that person as unmotivated, but just kind of recognizing the barriers. Oh, the other thing too is that so many times it can be so discouraging to try when there's not a lot of options, right? And there's racism, and there's all sorts of factors at play, right? Classism, ableism, all the things. And so, yeah, it's really devastating for people. So I would just say that knowing that everybody is motivated for something, and trying to figure out, like, what is it for you? Like, okay, it makes sense that this is comforting to you. It makes sense that you feel safe here. It makes sense that you feel taken care of, and it's scary. And then when you go out on your own, you're having to pay bills with, in Manitoba, it's $225 per month for everything. I went and got one bag of groceries last night, and it was $42. Like, and that was just a couple things for dinner, right? Like, and I'm not a big spender. I work at a nonprofit. But that's just what it is, right? And so recognizing that it's difficult for people, but also using your relationship skills to make good relationships with landlords, and kind of go ahead and pave the way. And drawing on those strengths they have in themselves, what their hopes are, what their dreams are. In motivational interviewing, we talk about the miracle question: if you could have whatever you want, and then saying, we might not be able to achieve all those things, but let's try for some of them. And you're not gonna, like, I can't guarantee you a result, but I can guarantee you won't be alone.
Yeah, I'm glad that both responses too kind of highlighted on a few really important things that are really great that they're integrated into your rehousing conversations. One is like, I heard from Amelia, is like, how do we minimize the external stressors, or like environmental factors that are making it difficult to look for housing, or making it difficult for you to even think about housing. So if I feel like I have some consistency, safety, security, and a temporary accommodation, I can maybe be motivated or focus around other things like rehousing. Right. I also heard too, like, there's some transaction stuff, like creating some incentives, but I also heard like it's very relational, right? So, and part of that is like validation of like the hardship of what they're experiencing, what they're coming up against. But then also normalizing it to some extent too, to say, this is a really difficult housing market for everybody. You also have very difficult additional barriers to consider, but like, yes, we are in the middle of a housing crisis. And despite that, like, I think about it as like, it's like when jobs are hard to find, you don't look less, right? You look more, and you have to use different strategies and diversify how you're going to look for employment. And I think about that the same way in housing. When I used to be a housing worker, I'd be like, if I'm noticing like the same type of strategies that we're doing to look for housing is getting the same not great result, how do we switch up our strategies? So like, maybe we were looking at Kijiji ads, but maybe now you're going to get in my car, and we're going to go do some neighborhood audits and look for rent signs and things like that. Or we're going to go talk to people in a building to say like, hey, do you know who I need to talk to about from the property management? Like, grease the wheels a bit. But even if it doesn't produce a result, it creates new hope or new opportunity, a new motivation, just by changing what it looks like. It's breaking the stagnation, right? I also just want to,
the hope is built when they know they're not going to have to experience those things alone,
Right.
right? And that's where I think like having a common vision or a goal of being housing focused, or like, that's what I love with DI leading the way with diversion, right? Like, we are here because you deserve better, and we are all unified on that goal. And it doesn't matter if you're working in finance, or if you're working janitorial, or if you're a caseworker, or it does not matter what your job is. It's, hey, hi, welcome here, and you deserve better, and we're going to help you, right? And you're not going to be alone.
Right.
Because so often it's not the difficult thing that people are going through, it's being by themselves that's so traumatizing.
Right.
Yeah.
Walking with them through that journey, right? Like, I think
And only promising that, not promising a result, right? Not promising your dream home, but like I can promise you won't be alone.
I see here in the chat that Peter added that they have significant resources on homelessness and disability and are willing to share and also feature your organization on our Give Back podcast. So definitely, Peter, like if you're a registered attendee for this session today, I have your contact information. We can reach out and figure out like how we can partner and profile some stuff. That'd be really, really great. Just for folks to know too, a big part of CSTN is that we do host a lot of resources for shelters to draw from that were created by other shelters throughout Canada and the United States. So one is that if you're looking for something, like a resource or some direction around how to start, I don't know, a diversion program, don't feel like you have to start it from scratch. Go to the website when you can see all under the diversion, the resource tab, all kinds of options that you can look from to make adaptations from. But also I want to also say, you might also have something really cool in your community or at your shelter that you think works really, really well, and that you want other communities to know about it. And so send them my way and we'll host them on the website so we can do that true kind of peer-to-peer knowledge exchange and make those resources available. It was very apparent to me in last week's conference that there's a lot of new shelter operators out there who think that they have to figure everything out for themselves from scratch. I can't imagine how overwhelming that must feel. So the intention of this group is really about peer support and peer engagement and helping and sharing that knowledge of what we have. I'm also going to do, I'm mindful of the time, I'm going to do one plug, two plugs actually. There is our next webinar at the end of this month on the 27th, is all things by name data, coordinated access, and quote unquote, like supporting shelter guests to get document ready or imminently housable. So if that's a topic that interests you, go to the website. It's under the webinars tab and you can register there. But I also want to mention at the end of January is that our friends in Siloam Mission mentioned motivational interviewing. Really, really critical skill to have that not everybody who works in shelter maybe has had the opportunity to ever be formally trained on it. So at the end of January, our topic for the webinar is actually motivational interviewing and assertive engagement in a shelter setting, quote, rolling with resistance to the rehousing process. And so my focus for that hour together, hour and a half, is not am I in assertive engagement in general, but specifically with shelter guests and specifically with shelter guests who are maybe pre-contemplative or contemplative about the rehousing process. So how do you generate that motivation, find that currency to start that process with them? So if you're interested in that, look for that coming out soon. I'm not seeing any new questions come up. I have other questions, but that's for another day. I'm sure I can ask them over email to our presenters if I need help getting some answers on stuff. I do want to say big thank you ×2 to our presenters because you made time available for the first session and then you were so flexible and agreeable to make time for the second session. So thank you so much. Really, really do appreciate that. And thank you to our attendees for joining us for the second part. The second part will be, this recording will be hosted on the CSTN website. So it will be partnered with the part one that's already there. Any last comments? Or I'm going to actually, maybe this is a good way to send off with this question, is to say in like 30 seconds or less, if someone came to you and said, we're thinking about starting a rapid rehousing program in our shelter, what is the one piece of advice that you would give to them to consider in that implementation in 30 seconds or less? And maybe we'll start with Amelia.
Meeting the guests where they're at pretty much is what is the main thing, acceptance, because we don't know where they're coming from. A lot of individuals come in frustrated, and they're not frustrated or upset with you, right? But just connecting with them, understanding where they are, and just meeting them where they're at, providing those immediate basic needs and allowing them to feel comfortable in that moment before looking at what is the next step for you, I think is what's important in getting started.
Great. Thank you.
I think relationships are so important. I think that the time spent in building those relationships with people really pays off in the long run. So somebody new starting this might think, well, we can just go in and offer some resources and everybody will be in and out. But it's more than that, right? There definitely takes some time to build relationships and to build some trust, not just with one person, but then also that word spreads in the community. And if you're known as a worker or as an organization that follows through and is consistent, then you have more people who are willing to work with you to explore those next steps.
Great.
Just to build on Christian, partnerships, corporate social responsibility, corporations, government, and nonprofits.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Yeah, this response to homelessness is only going to be solved when all sectors, including the private sector and different levels of government, and the private industry sees a shared responsibility in contributing to the solution. And I do appreciate that our presenters kind of said, focus on more the relational pieces, right? You can have all the right resources, and there is like this operational thing about putting together the right resources for a rehousing program. There is a template if you want to, or core tenets or things to, but yeah, no one's going to use it if there isn't that relationship there to action those tools. So I appreciate that is kind of like, what's the driving philosophy around how to use these tools? So with that, we're pretty much ending right on time. So I just want to say again, thank you to all the attendees. Thank you to the presenters. Appreciate everybody's time and contributions. The recording will go up shortly and I'll send it out to all the attendees. In the meantime, I hope everybody has a great weekend, and reach out in between meetings if you need. I'm at grant@transformshelter.ca. Big or small, happy to help with anything. Bye for now, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye, Grant. Bye, everyone.
Bye.